Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for all being here today. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's Friday afternoon, and so I thought let's get a bit of engagement going with the crowd. Just two quick questions, really, just so we know who we're talking to. First up, hands up for people that would say they have heard of the zero-emission zones for logistics. It could be in the Netherlands, could also be abroad. That's most people here in the crowd. Good to see. Thank you. And the second question, who here would say they are confidently knowledgeable on the intricacies of logistics or urban freight distribution in the city centre? Okay, good. I'm glad to see there are some people here. But yes, so thank you. So that's a bit about you, a bit about me quickly. My name is Elliot. I am a newly appointed sustainable travel advisor at Masodi in the United Kingdom. We deliver expert sustainable travel and highway services to a wide range of clients. The logos are on here, and including our behavioural change campaign, 1 day a week. And I got that job through an internship at the Dutch Cycling Embassy. So thanks to them for letting me speak here today for that. It shows you that even as an intern, there are hopes for people out there. Will people listen to you, though? That's another question. The first question I had when I started this research project was really, the Netherlands, there's lots of bikes everywhere. So why are there still lots of vans everywhere? Why is there high HGVs everywhere? And I think that revealed my own ignorance to logistics and urban freight distribution, and a sort of cognitive disregard I had for the white van. I would see the white van and not really understand the intricacies, the details behind how it got there, the different types of journeys they can go on and the different needs. And so I think, as I'll go on in this presentation, maybe lots of other people had that as well. You might disagree, but we'll get onto it, because urban logistics is quite complicated. There's lots of different actors within their waste movement, and I think Stan is going to go on in detail about how that is complicated for city governments. But one way they're trying to resolve an issue of high emissions is through zero-emission zones. Almost forgot their name there for a second. Zero-emission zones quickly are the gradual phasing out of polluting vehicles. I've focused on vans because they're more similar to cargo bikes in their the volume of goods you can transport. And so, from 2025, 18 cities in the Netherlands will introduce these. And there are, as part of the zones, there are different policies that will be implemented to help people in that transition, one of which is modal shift. Stan will get onto the other ones, but modal shift to cargo bikes is what I'm focusing on today. Sonia thankfully ran you through the groups of people that are using cargo bikes in cities, so I can move on to the next slide, which introduces the research question I had for the project, which was really I utilized the framework that is promoted about the indicators that help explain how the Netherlands got so good at having large cycling volumes. So I adapted those indicators to the logistics sector slightly to identify problems and opportunities in policy and technology that stakeholders in the sector have. And I did this through conducting 9 interviews, so not a lot of interviews, so a small sample size, but also with some literature review. So I'll now walk you through problems and opportunities I discovered. I have 6. So I will get onto them now. And the first one really is that costs are really uncertain for users. So as Sonia said, the immediate cost of buying a cargo bike individually is cheaper than a van, yes, but if the volume of the goods you can transport is lower than a van, then you might need more cargo bikes, which means the costs increase. And also, the most expensive cost in logistics is actually the rider or the vehicle driver. So having more vehicles means you have higher costs. So it's not as simple as saying cargo bike is cheaper than a van. Also, the durability issues of cargo bikes, because initially regular cycling technology was used in cargo bikes. This wasn't used to driving with high payloads throughout the day. So there is high wear and tear on bikes particularly still for brakes and tyres. There's a high maintenance there for them. But it isn't all bad news. There are great benefits that Sonia also ran through. So I don't need to spend too long on these. But they aren't just in the cargo bike manufacturers, but also in the data, smart data, in the boxes that you see. All these are different companies, and they're all learning day by day the different needs of the actors in the sector, which is good to see. So not that I'm a negative person, but I'll skip the benefits and go back to the negatives, problems that I identified. And really, as Sonia also said, changing the vehicle like for like isn't a simple process. This will then have implications on the planning and the sorting and the loading of goods if you have less vehicle or more vehicles for which you need to transport the goods. And this might need a different workforce, and so companies will be reluctant maybe to change. So that also explains why there has been a lack, or I saw a lack of immediate modal shift. But the positive thing is that if the zero-emission zones are framed more than just a technological shift, but focus on the entire logistics, strategy, and operation, then changes are more likely to happen, and cargo bikes should then benefit from that, because mixed fleets can be utilized more, instead of the discussion being about switching to electric vans. Another reason maybe why the slow modal shift has been seen is a sort of fragmented governance system that exists. So when discussing with stake interviews, there was a lack of reference to leadership, but also a lack of clearly defined roles within administrators, but also in the private sector, and a poor communication really, and knowledge. And that's because it's a very commercial sector. So commercial companies don't necessarily want to share their information and their data if that's a competitive advantage to them. So accessing that data is hard, and it's also hard for municipalities to access data because bicycles are hard to trace. So again, it means that movements aren't necessarily known, and behaviours have not been understood. And also from actors outside of the logistics sector, as I mentioned, it's a commercial sector. It's quite a high barrier for people, maybe from cycling advocates or knowledge institutes. If they're not familiar with logistics, then maybe they haven't been engaging in the discussion to help promote cargo bikes. So a good opportunity really is to integrate cargo bikes and logistics better into the discussions about how we see cities in the future, what space we need to provide for them, and also share the benefits better with cities. So then the cargo bike isn't just about zero emissions, but also about taking up less public space. And to do this, we need some policy goals. And I think Stan will go into some policy goals that Utrecht has in a second. Next, fourth one, inconsistent administration. So different zones are in different cities. They are different sizes, so they're not all the same. The one in Amsterdam has recently been decreased in size in the last year from what it was initially intended to be, and in other cities such as Assen, it's a smaller zone compared to Amsterdam. So we will see different impacts happening. And that causes a lack of clarity for users of cargo bikes. If they don't know the zones, if they're changing, and there's different exemptions. But the positive thing is zones are effective. They've already, during the interviews, people weren't necessarily talking about zero emission zones in terms of having an impact already, because they hadn't started. But the milieu zones, the environmental zones in the Netherlands, had already had an impact on small, medium enterprises. They were already changing their behavior, maybe not using a car as much because they were no longer allowed into certain zones in the city because they were they were banned. And the phase will happen with exemptions. So I think it's time to just go for the zones, implement the zones, and we'll see. There's been 10 years of discussions. So another negative, once it's been implemented, the policy, are there facilities for the people to use the cargo bikes? And currently, not necessarily, because their behaviours and their needs have not fully been understood by the city, although that's beginning to change in the last year. As presentations earlier today mentioned. But again, there's been a lack of parking space, lack of charging facilities, lack of loading areas. So if you're thinking, I want to switch to a cargo bike, it's not exactly easy to switch to it because you can't securely charge or find somewhere for your bike. But that's beginning to change, hopefully, because hubs are being developed. And I forgot to mention earlier, when I was talking about negatives, there was a picture of Cycloon up there. But they were a company that I should have mentioned it when they were up. But unfortunately, if I did this presentation a year ago, I would have said they were a successful story of cargo bike users using cargo bikes intrinsically motivated for sustainability. But unfortunately, in the last couple of months, they've actually had to lay off many of their staff because costs were rising. And it's a very competitive field. So it's unfortunate that those people have been laid off, but it just shows you the difficulty people are having with using cargo bikes. And they had their own hubs. So that's why I'm bringing it up now, because I'm talking about hubs. And different governance models really are needed to be explored when you're talking about hubs, because they had their own, but they're quite expensive to use. And so a good explorative solution is to have a sort of public-privately owned collaborative approach to hubs. So that's something to look out for going forward. Finally, safety has also been an issue from cycling advocacy side of things. Outside the cargo bike sector, I would say they kind of have a negative perception of cargo bikes because they see them as competitors to cycle lanes and dangerously wide and faster moving compared to regular bicycles, which surprised me. As a cycling advocate, you could say I thought they would be seen as safer than vans, but that's not always the case here, which is surprising. But also, accident data is inconclusive, so research is needed to be done to check that. And hopefully the implementation of the light electric vehicle framework, which comes out this year, will ease those concerns. But it also raises the question about when we're designing cities in the future and integrating logistics, if we are implementing 30-kilometer-hour zones everywhere, do we need to have bike lanes? Do we need to widen them? Or will everybody be using the road? So all these discussions are going to be happening in the next couple of years. And training is also needed for the riders of these because usability of cargo bikes is different to regular bikes. So that also needs to be developed and financially assisted to smaller companies if we want and expect them to switch to cargo bikes. So in conclusion, there's problems and opportunities both in cargo bikes, and luckily the technology is being developed, lessons learned and improved, and that's positive, and hope and satisfaction's increasing, and the modal share will increase as a result. But there's also problems with logistics. Logistics is where the virtual world of e-commerce meets the physical world of public space, and that gap is sort of unknown but closing as we learn more and take on logistics and integrate them better into our design and planning of cities. And so hopefully that cognitive disregard I mentioned at the start is being reduced. People are acknowledging logistics, they're acknowledging the white van, and hopefully including them in discussions about what we want cities to be in the future. So thank you very much for listening to me for 13 minutes. And up next, I think, is Stan. And please, the report, sorry, I forgot to mention the report is on the Dutch Cycling Embassy's website, as well as their handout if people wanted to learn more information or read more, because there's some incredible work sourced in that report. Thank you.